The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. As always, I'm your host, David Wilms, and as always, co-host Nephi Cole is sitting across his computer screen from me on what I assume is a frigid, snowy day in Sheridan, because it's a frigid, snowy day in Cheyenne. How are you doing, Nephi?
It's pretty good. I'm waiting for this whole global warming thing to really kick in for me, because I've been investing a lot of money in greenhouse gases. It's just not working for me.
Oh, yeah. My heating bill has also been a little bit high these past couple of months.
Yeah.
I think I woke up this morning, it was like 1 degree, 14 below wind chill. It's been snowing a little bit all day.
Look, I'm doing my part. I drive a truck with a big V8 engine in it. I put a snow machine in the back of the truck, and before I leave the house, I start the snow machine and I drive around with, because I'm trying to, it's cold here.
Just trying to pump out a bunch of carbon to heat it up.
And it's not working for me. It's not working at all. Luckily, my house has a giant heater in it too. So we just crank that baby up to about 76 degrees, walk around in Bermuda shorts,
Well, I hope, I'm sitting here, because you fly out of a small airport and I fly out of a small airport, and I'm sitting here thinking, I'm supposed to fly out at 6 a.m. tomorrow, and we don't have the same kind of equipment for clearing snow and de-icing and all that stuff that a big DIA has.
Yeah,
so
Sheridan.
I'm kind of wondering, is my flight going to go in the morning?
Yeah, it's going to go. They got it taken care of. Your airport's bigger than my airport. I have never, knock on wood, I have never had my airport fail me.
How many gates does your airport have?
1.
That's all ours has too.
It's Nephi Cole's gate.
Our airports are the same size. How many flights a day do you have out of that one gate?
2.
That's what we have as well. So we are the same sized airport.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's the best thing on earth. I get in my car, I get in my truck, I start the snowmobile up, fire up the truck, drive to the airport, I actually don't have a snowmobile. I just want to come clean with the listeners because I feel guilty for making that up. But anyway, I still go to the airport. And, I think I have to get up at 4:15 to make my 5 a.m. flight.
Yeah, so my flight leaves at 6 a.m. and I get up at about 5 and I get dressed and I get to the airport by about 5:30 and go through security, and they board at 5:35, something like that.
Are you enough of a regular? My security guys, they welcome me as Mr. Cole as I'm walking up to security.
Yeah, I know a couple of them with mine. Yeah,
they're literally nice to see you again, Mr. Cole. Do you have your driver's license? And you hand it to them, and
and the guy, I know one of the guys that that does the handle the bags and then also
waves the
handles
plane out.
Waves the plane out. Yeah, exactly. This the one that. So I know him too. He lives a couple blocks from me. So yeah, that's what it's like.
Well, it's funny.
And I always recognize about half a dozen cars in the parking lot.
Yeah,
I didn't know so-and-so was on a trip this week.
I've got a friend who does the same thing. He works at the, in the mornings at the airport, and he actually has another job. He works for the state. I won't say what agency, but he works for the state as well. But he goes out, helps with the flights in the morning, because then he gets free flights.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's something you got.
Yeah, they get free flights.
Oh, maybe that's why
he does job?
It. Because this guy does, he's like, this is my side hustle. He has his day job and he comes in the morning and does the.
He flies for free, and his family too. So it's not just him. So his wife and kids and everybody, they go all over the place all the time. And
that's some real value.
Yeah, well, that's why he does it.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that was a thing. Maybe I'll start doing that.
I thought of it, but I like my sleep too much.
If I didn't have to get on that flight so many times, maybe I'd work there and help with it.
Yeah, it'd be awkward when you took off your vest and got onto the plane.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man. Anyway, I guess we could talk about the perks of small town air travel all day long, but maybe instead we can talk about some of this other stuff. So, our last podcast, I mentioned that we'd received a bunch of emails, people asking about some of these different secretarial orders that have been coming out of the Department of Interior over the past few days, and maybe talking through them and what they actually mean and what might happen as a result of them. And so I thought it might be good to have a conversation about that. We're not going to answer very many questions today. I'm just going to lead in with that, right? We can tell you what some of the secretarial orders are. But I think it's important to start from this position. Like, so, like what a secretarial order is, right? And let's talk about a presidential executive order too, because as we talk about this, a lot of the secretarial orders that Secretary Burgum has issued in the past week or so have been implementing, or the first step, I should say, in implementing the president's executive orders. And we'll talk about that when we get into some of the specifics. But a good portion of these are the president issued an executive order, and the executive order, like let's just go to maybe a civics 101 here for just 1 second. An executive order is issued by the chief executive officer of the government, right? So at the state level, it would be the governor, and here at the federal level, it would be the president. They issue an executive order, and the executive order is just telling the executive branch what they are to do, like what they should start doing. It's an order that's implementing the powers of the executive branch. So in this instance, let's use a basic example, one that happened. So the president issued an executive order calling on, I'll just generalize, but it was to establish an energy emergency and call on all of the agencies that work in the energy space at all to use the authorities that they have been given under, by Congress to move that agenda forward. So an energy emergency, meaning like we need more transmission, more oil and gas, more electrons coming in, and a grid that can support those electrons, right? And so now you federal agencies go out and implement this order to achieve that goal with using the powers that Congress has given you under various laws. And so that goes to the secretary. And in this instance, Secretary of Interior has a lot of authorities that have been given by Congress under several different statutes. For example, running the onshore and offshore oil and gas leasing program. And so then the secretary would take that order from the president and issue their own secretarial order to the various agencies within the Department of Interior to take certain actions to meet this presidential objective, right? And to take actions pursuant to existing law by Congress to execute this policy vision. So that's, and if you want to expand on that a little bit, Nephi, if I missed anything, I thought to start this all out, we should just start at the very basic level of what is a secretarial order, what is an executive order, and how they're tiered together. And then there's one level down. There's a tiering down on that I would expect to see next. So you have your secretarial orders, and then you could have a director's order. So you could have the director of the Bureau of Land Management, or the director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the National Park Service, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or pick your bureau, right? They might give a director's order to the staff under their charge on how to implement the secretary's order that is implementing the president's order. So it's just all the directives to do the thing that the president wants to have done from a policy standpoint. How did I do?
I think you did fine. It's so boring.
I know, it's super boring, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to add to
I know.
it.
I was so boring, and as I'm talking, I'm like, man, I'm the most boring person. Everybody's probably turned this off. It's super boring.
Yeah, it is boring. So let's get to the exciting part.
You were sitting there doing other work while I was doing that.
I
You're
actually
like,
was. I'm really sorry. It's true. I was reading
I was
something.
watching you. I was watching your eyes. I'm like, he's so zoned out on this. He has no idea what I'm saying at this point. He's just tuned out completely. And if the co-host is tuned out, that means everybody listening probably tuned out to the last several minutes. And so I apologize.
Very
That was so
exciting. Sorry, Dave.
boring. It was
So back to
boring.
secretarial orders, director's orders. They're all just They're all just executive authorities. So there you go.
Yeah, that was the quickest way to say it. I spent all that time and you're like, dude, they're just executive authority. They're just taking what Congress said you can do and they're doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, I guess the interesting part of it is like typically there's some stuff, even with EOs. This was a gripe of mine for a number of different administrations. Was there's an EO that was released by the Clinton administration, is Executive Order 10134 maybe, that requires that if you have an executive action that's going to, or any agency action that's going to affect state governments to any degree, that you have to consult with the states before you do these things. And so I have like an ongoing beef with any government agency that, implements some kind of action without reaching out to state and local authorities to visit with them about what it's going to do in reality, because I always say, well, that violates that Clinton era executive order that has never been rescinded, that says you got to reach out and get, local input, whether it be from the states or local government, before you issue actions at the executive level that would negatively affect those states. So anyway, nobody does that enough.
I don't know if they did it here.
Well,
Frankly, I mean,
it's say.
Don't know. Anybody listening that works for a state and wants to answer that question, if they were reached out to ahead of time, consulted on any of this, that'd be good to know. Let's talk about some of these. So here's what, we talked about what the executive orders do in a super boring way. So I'm sorry. I think it's really important. The last piece I'm going to say before we dive into the specific orders issued is, for the most part, now this is a kind of a generalization because there are some executive orders that have immediate impact, right? So I don't want to suggest that they don't all. There are some secretarial orders that might have immediate impact. But for the most part, these secretarial orders are charging agencies with gathering a bunch of information and putting a plan together to execute over some period of time to achieve the policy objectives laid out in the secretarial order. So there have been a lot of media reports, stories on some of these executive orders and secretarial orders. And then you see some of the social media commentary that gives the sky is falling analysis. Like this is going to, this secretarial order is going to, close down or it's going to cause this national monument to cease to exist, or it's going to cause oil and gas development everywhere, or it's going to impact my access for hunting and fishing, or, X, Y, and Z. It says all these things. And my response to all those is maybe, but we don't actually know yet. So what we're going to talk about is what the orders actually say, and we can talk a little bit about what we think that might mean from a implementation standpoint down the road. But a lot of this we're not going to actually see play out. It's going to take months and or years for a lot of these orders to play out to really know, okay, what's the on the ground impact going to be, if there is any at all, right? And so I want to say that up front, because I do think there's been just so much chatter on social media of people getting ahead of these and reading things into them that maybe aren't in there yet, and maybe they will be. Like, they might be right eventually, or they might be wrong eventually in some of the commentary. Right now, we're at the stage of, we're tasking you with doing this thing, and this thing is gathering information and creating a plan to to execute on that information that you gather, to do this policy, to achieve this policy goal, right? Anything
EO
to add there? You think?
Yeah, it was 13132. I found it. Executive Order 13132.
You're so bored with what I was saying again that you went to researching other stuff.
No,
Man, I'm striking out on this podcast already.
This is very important to this discussion. So, let's talk about some of these exciting executive orders that have come out and actually the implications of them, because I do think that there's actually a theme in a bunch of them. Do you want me to get to the theme first or after we start talking about them?
If you want to start the theme, you can.
Well, I'll say first thing.
There is one big theme that plugs into all of these, I think.
Is deregulation the one?
I mean, that's not the overall theme.
Okay.
I don't think that's one of the EOs, but I don't think that's the overall theme.
No, I don't think so either. But for me, the big thing was domestic production. So
yes.
So that's the biggest theme, is the domestic production. Every one of these EOs is centered around some way making it easier to have domestic production, and that's not necessarily energy, and I'll get back into that, but it's just it's domestic production. And why do I say it's not just about energy? Because some of them are specific to energy, and all of them may be related to energy, but some of them are about minerals. And so for me, the ones that I read, that I found particularly interesting was not just the extraction of energy producing, not just fossil fuels, which we typically think of when we think of, domestic production, but also rare earth. And so there's a lot of focus in some of these EOs, I think, on opening up opportunities for extraction in terms of mining. And so that's, to me, that's the opening salvo that I saw. These are all centered around American, energy independence, and and some of that is trying to produce more stuff, but also it's trying to kind of fill those gaps in our electric market as well, I thought.
I think that's right. And actually, this might be worth talking about just briefly. This is a little side tangent, but when you mentioned the minerals piece, it gets me thinking about other stuff.
Uh-huh.
And it makes me think there's something we don't know, right? So
something else is coming.
Right.
Yeah.
Meaning what we do know is that critical minerals, and by critical minerals, there's a list of minerals that are viewed as critical. They don't necessarily mean that they're super rare. There's a process for a federal process for declaring a mineral as a critical mineral. Critical minerals are ones that are frequently used, and I'll just generalize, but in high-tech stuff, right? In your cell phones, in your cars, computers, tablets, all of those have critical minerals. In AI, the next big arms race globally, that I don't know if I should use those terms, arms race, if that's the right term, but the next big global push is around AI, artificial intelligence, and the servers, the processing, the computing that's necessary to do artificial intelligence it takes a ton of energy, but it also takes a lot of critical minerals as well. And there are parts of the world that have corners on, a number of these different minerals that are used in some of these, that are sourced in some of these things. And it actually creates, in the eyes of many, it creates this national security issue, being very, very dependent upon potentially adversarial type of countries for minerals that are absolutely critical to a lot of our day-to-day needs and infrastructure, from transportation to computing to artificial intelligence to defense, like all of those things. And we have places in the U.S. that are where there could be opportunities to mine some of these, but we don't have stockpiles of all of the critical minerals. Like if you look through the list of critical minerals, there are some that you're just not going to find in really recoverable sources in the U.S. They have to come from someplace else. And what's really fascinating, and maybe you're following this a little bit, Nephi, too, but the fact that the president talks about Greenland a lot, and you can make you can make fun of that approach and the rhetoric around that all you want, but the underlying piece there is Greenland has a ton of critical minerals, and the conversations about Ukraine recently of we'll continue to provide defense for Ukraine, but they've got to provide us with minerals. It's the critical minerals because they have huge stockpiles of critical minerals that maybe we don't have access to. There is a recognition that from a national security standpoint, these critical mineral stockpiles, not stockpiles, but these critical mineral deposits, resources are, and having trading partners that are allies, not adversaries, are they're really important. And so you see that in some of these secretarial orders. Like if you read between the lines, to your point, Nephi, they're not all about oil and gas. There's a lot of it about oil and gas for sure.
Yes.
But there's a lot of it about mining. There's an undertone here of this recognition that these minerals are incredibly important. And the last piece I'll say, and I'll turn over to you. Last piece I'd say is for renewable energy, for folks that want to switch from oil and gas to wind and solar, for example, those wind turbines and those solar panels and arrays, they also require critical minerals. They have components where those are an important piece of it. And so if you're trying to diversify your energy grid as well, you still need those underlying minerals. So I just wanted to double down on that point of yours. I think that's one that maybe isn't getting as much play in the media right now. I don't know that they're really talking about some of these things from the mineral standpoint, like the things that are needed to meet the moment of where the economy is going.
Yep.
And the global economy is going.
Yeah, and it's more than just the extraction, because that's the other thing that this administration is focused on is also the refining, and then what you do with those critical minerals in terms of, obviously that's the issue with like Taiwan, right? Which is we have this huge demand in our defense sectors as well as in our private lives for chips, and so all these raw materials that are making these things are coming from someplace else, and the chips that you have to find, those are made someplace else too. And so that's interesting focus. And sorry about that. I didn't have my ringer turned off, so somebody tried to call me.
I could barely hear it. I could barely hear it. Nobody would have known if you didn't just broadcast it.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. These rare earth minerals are some of the things, rare earth elements are part of what they're looking at. There's also, just a wide variety of materials that you have to have. And they're in everything from thermal weapons sites to, like you said, solar panels. So it's actually more important for us from a national security standpoint than people would think. That said, we're not national security folks, so we're not going to have a treatise on that, but we're just going to say, like, we use this stuff every day.
Yeah. But it's important to note, so that's one of the underlying reasons. There's going to be a push to allow more of this to come online. And if the administration is successful in that, in speeding up the permitting process, for example, and getting some of these projects out there, yeah, that's going to have localized impact.
Yeah.
Like there will be, like it's undeniable. You dig a hole in the ground, you're going to have localized impacts. And so, there's going to be a lot of the NIMBY, commenting as this stuff plays out, the not in my backyard, right? There's going to be, because there will be people impacted by this. And every proposal to disturb land, to dig a big hole to mine, it has kind of a double-edged sword, right? It creates economic opportunity for people. It creates high-paying jobs, for sure. It contributes raw materials to the things that we need, and at the same time, it's chewing up landscapes. It's going to displace wildlife. It could have It could have negative impacts on people that live nearby, with additional dust or particulates in the air, that kind of stuff. There's every one of these projects will have a double-edged sword to it.
Yeah. It would be helpful if there were more employees to process the requests, but just kidding. Previous podcast.
No, don't kid on that. I mean, it's true.
Yeah,
right.
But
you're not wrong.
But on the environmental component, it's something that I think lose track of a little bit, and it's worth just kind of referencing because, we've talked about it a lot in private conversations, but I'm not sure it's, everybody does, which is environmental impacts of, we have how many billion people do we have on the planet right now?
Yeah, what's somewhere between 7 and 8, I think.
So, there's a footprint that's associated with economic development. There's a footprint that's associated with having electricity and a refrigerator and a microwave, and that's gonna exist no matter what. And so one of the challenges that you face when we talk about these things like these, in the United States of America, we've had the luxury of exporting our externalities to a large degree. What do I mean by that? Well, the externality of having those things, in a lot of cases, we've been able to, we have really cool stuff, and we have an extremely high standard of living, and we can be environmentally very protective of our backyard because of the amount of money that we have and the high standard of living. And what trade has allowed us to do in history is to be able to make somebody else pay the environmental consequences of our consumption. And so, to a large degree, when we look at these rare earth minerals and we say like, well, we're going to get them from Ukraine or someplace like that, or Afghanistan. When we ship those things in, they come in nice, tiny little packages and it's very clean. We get our iPhone and it's, it comes in a little white box, and we think about the waste that's associated with that little white box. But in a lot of cases, we have never had to see in our country, we don't have to see a lot of the dirty side of, what it takes to live the life that we live, a lot of, to have the things that we have. And that's a good and a bad thing. It's nice for us because it allows us to have these great spaces that are close to us that are still pristine, that are untouched by resource extraction. It's bad for us because also then, we're, as I said, we're exporting that. And so it's naive for us to think that there's not a footprint someplace on this planet from us having those things. And so as we move forward and we do, if we embrace this idea of basically onshoring some of those externalities, we have to be ready to do that in the right way. And so that means that you have to be willing to look at mitigation, avoidance, at all those pieces of the puzzle that go into producing energy or producing, extracting materials in the place where you live, rather than asking them for them to be extracted in Ukraine and then sent to you.
Yeah, you're right. Let me dive into a couple of these specific EO or the Secretarial Orders here, so we can talk about really what they say. So I'm going to start with one. It's Secretarial Order 3418. And it's entitled Unleashing American Energy. And so this one is in order to implement provisions of the president's January 20th Executive Order 14154, which was titled Unleashing American Energy. And, it's this, how do they, the goal is how do they reduce what they call roadblocks or regulatory burdens, I think, to enhance the development of energy and natural resources on lands in the United States. And so, this goes, the focus on this would be, they say our focus must be on advancing innovation to improve energy and critical minerals identification, permitting, leasing, development, production, transportation, refining, distribution, exporting, and generation capacity of the United States to provide a reliable, diversified, growing, and affordable supply of energy for our nation. So this is the kind of I was going to say one thing's missing from that statement. I was going to say cradle to grave, but it doesn't get all the way to like the recycling, reuse of some of these materials as well. I think there might be a piece missing from this secretarial order, in my opinion. So here's a little bit of what this does. So first of all, it revokes a number. Well, I should take this back. There are two levels of revocation here. First, in the original executive order, the president revoked roughly 10 prior executive orders, issued by the Biden administration. And what I will say about that is it is not uncommon when a president comes in, regardless of political party, that they're going to look at the prior president's executive orders, and there might be some that they keep, and there could be a lot of them that they scrap, because those executive orders are implementing the policy of that prior administration. And clearly, when you have different parties coming into office, they're going to have different policies and different approaches to policies. So you're going to see a revocation of a lot of prior executive orders. That happened here right out of the gates. Then it goes to the secretarial level. So the president revoked a lot of prior executive orders issued by the Biden administration. Then you get to the secretarial level. Okay, what are the authorities that the secretary has pursuant to law? What are, of all the agencies that they oversee, that the Secretary of Interior oversees, that reports to the Secretary of Interior, what kind of authorities do they have? And so what the secretary did is directed all of the assistant secretaries to review all agency actions and create an action plan on how to comply with the policy, right, in which is the president's policy, and going into very specifics, okay, very specific things. So it's the first thing is pretty simple. Take all necessary steps to ensure any actions taken to implement the revoked executive orders are terminated, including but not limited to terminating any contract or agreement on behalf of entities or programs abolished or revoked. So it's like implement that executive order and terminate any contracts that were entered into pursuant to that prior executive order. The next piece is the piece I want to spend more time on, which is what the assistant secretaries will be asked to do from a policy standpoint across these different bureaus within the Secretary of Interior, under the Secretary of Interior's auspice. Okay, so what they're asked to do is take a look at things to look at documents to suspend, revise, rescind, regulations to deal with, secretarial orders to address solicitors' opinions, instructions, memorandas, departmental manuals. What are the things that are inconsistent with the executive order?
Yeah, specifically, if you told them to look at 27 different executive actions by any of those entities, and within those 27, gave them 15 days to go through those and say, like, okay, flag these. You got 15 days to tell us how we're going to speed everything up in these 27 different executives, called out executive actions that he identified.
Yeah. And so then beyond that, then it's create an action plan to do the following things. And there's a number of them. I'll touch on a few of them just to give you an example. So institute an action plan and the steps necessary to implement that plan that would accomplish things like prioritizing reducing barriers to the use of federal lands for energy development, consistent with the principle of multiple use. That's the very first one. Actions to implement new and amended policies and procedures to increase the efficiency in the Bureau of Land Management's adjudication of applications for permits to drill. Stated another way, like how do you speed up the process for issuing permits, right? How do you reinstate leases issued by the BLM for natural resource development that were canceled between January 20th of 2021 and January 21st of 2025? So basically, if there were leases canceled by the Biden administration And it doesn't say oil and gas leases. It says all leases. It could be grazing leases, oil and gas leases. It could be a mineral lease. It could be all leases. Figure out how to reinstate those leases if there is a way. Reinstate as appropriate. So there's some discretion there. There might, at the end of the day, you might take an analysis and say, I think they were right not to issue those leases, or they were right to rescind those leases. Or maybe in this case, we disagree with it and we want to reinstate leases. So it's a lot of evaluate. Take the appropriate actions to offer more parcels of public land for oil and gas leasing, including through quarterly lease sales or additional lease sales, and then as appropriate and consistent with existing law. I'm not going to go through all 27, these, right? Yeah, I'm not going to go through all of them. I just wanted to hit on a few. Here's another one one of the last ones I want to hit on, which is actions to review and, as appropriate, revise all withdrawn public lands consistent with existing law. Okay. The one thing I want everybody to notice is every single time it says consistent with existing law. Like they're being asked, Secretary Burgum is saying, do these things so long as the law allows you to do these things. Like, we're not going to go break the law. And if they do something inconsistent with the law, they'll be held accountable for it, right? Somebody will sue them. They'll be held accountable for it. But the idea is to not do that. That's the ask through this secretarial order, is try and do these changes, but be consistent with law. The reason I mentioned this revise actions to review and as appropriate revise all withdrawn public lands. So I've heard some people talk about this as this is the way that they'll look at doing things like changing boundaries on national monuments, right? That maybe some national monuments might be vulnerable, or there might be areas that had mineral withdrawals that might be vulnerable or repealed. And there might be, this is one of those places where I say, maybe, that's not out of the realm of possibility, but I view it as premature to claim any of that's going to happen. Right? I look at this and say, they are asked to review and, as appropriate, revise all withdrawn public lands. Revise in what way? It doesn't really say. Does that mean reinstate them as open to mining and oil and gas development or other things? I don't know. Does it mean everything will be? I don't know. A lot of these are evaluate and make recommendations, right? That's what a lot of these proposals are. Evaluate and make recommendations. And then we'll go to the implementation, and we don't know what the implementation looks like yet.
I think that's an important point. It's an important point across the board, was that most of these actions, these that we're seeing, that we're talking about today, these are very much ideas. These are very much, these are paperwork exercises. They are not necessarily huge changes on the ground, although some of them can absolutely lead to that. But right now, it's just basically analyze and then put together the specific measurable plan that you're going to use to attain this, and by what time. Tell us how you're going to do it by what time. Very interesting that this came out of Burgum's wheelhouse, right? Who's a guy who has a real strong history in private industry. It very much reads like a corporate document where you're asking for very specific things. It's not a policy wonk document. It's an action document. And I at least that's my takeaway from it.
So So I'm going to do one more thing with this one, and then we'll dive into a couple others, because I think the others will go a lot faster. But the one thing I will say about this is you have to look at what is the policy objective with this secretarial order? Is to implement the president's executive order, which is directing the agencies to do everything you can to make it easier to tap into oil, gas, critical minerals, other resources.
Yep. The president
you have to recognize the secretary is charged with implementing the president's executive order, and that's the end result of this. So I'm not going to sugarcoat things and say things aren't going to happen. Like if you're somebody out there that is saying, I'm worried about, the prospect of, increased leasing for oil and gas development and therefore potentially increased oil and gas wells in places where I hunt. I'm not going to tell you that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. The policy is such that there are going to be a lot more acres offered for lease than there were under the Biden administration.
Exactly. There's going to be a lot more of something happening. Like you don't know what yet, because that's not what it was. The edict that came down from the top was figure out a way to do this. This is our goal. We want to do A. And then all these orders represent these are marching orders within the agencies to say, okay, you know what the overall goal is. I want you to tell me specifically exactly you're going to go through get rid of all the hurdles. And now we want you to go through and tell us exactly how you're going to implement that goal A. And that is, so where you're going from is from the policy, from the theoretical of like what the Trump administration said they want to see, now to marching orders from the secretary that's telling his sub-agencies. He's specifically telling every sub-agency, I want you to go through these areas that I've identified and give me the specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based plans that are going to implement these things. And so we don't know yet what they're going to do. You don't know exactly. That's the next step. But remember, he gave them 15 days to do this. So if there's going to be documentation. We may not ever get to see it, but you're going to see the idea, like the idea farm is churning. They're cooking something somewhere. We just don't know what the meal is yet.
Yeah. And there's some things we can probably pretty easily predict what the meal is going to be. Like we can see that they're probably going to, because there are specific calls to say, repeal the Bureau of Land Management's public lands rule, the one that allowed for mitigation leasing or compensatory mitigation, that type of leasing and habitat leasing. Like they're going to repeal that rule. Like that is going to happen. I can tell you definitively that is going to happen. They're going to look at making changes to the oil and gas leasing rules. Now, some of those they can't change because unless Congress changes it through the reconciliation process, like the increased royalty payments that went from 12%, I think, to 16.75% or 16.2%. Sorry, for a barrel of oil produced, the royalty produced, being paid to the states and the federal government. Like that was set by statute and confirmed by rule. So they're not going to be able to change that, but they might be able to change the bonding requirement, for example, like how much a company has to pay in bond before they can drill. That might be something that's on the table for rulemaking. There are screening criteria that the BLM developed for issuing leases that this BLM under this administration may very well look at and change those screening criteria to make it easier to lease bigger chunks of acres in places. That all that stuff is going to be in the works. They're going to look at recent resource management plan amendments to things like the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan, the Buffalo Management Plan, and the Miles City Management Plan. And they're going to open those up, and they're going to go through a public process, and they're going to make revisions to those. I don't know what those revisions are going to be. It's going to be a process, but those things are going to be on the table, and those documents will be opened up and revisited. Okay, because there were pieces of them that were very controversial, and folks in the communities near those places want to see more discussion around those RMPs. That's going to happen. There are sage grouse RMPs, resource management plan revisions, that were finalized for a couple of states, but not others. There's going to be an effort to finalize those. This administration will do that to get those across the finish line. There might be a few changes made from the draft that was from the last administration to a final in this administration. There are a lot of things that are going to happen, I guess is the point. And we can tell you, here's some of the things that are going to happen, but we can't tell you exactly. Like I can tell you the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan is going to be opened up and amended, but I can't tell you at all what that amended RMP is going to look like. I can tell you that's going to be a multi-year process to get that done, because that's just how these processes work. But I can't tell you what it's going to look like. And that's, I think, Nephi, I think maybe that's one thing that's worth saying is we can say they're going to look at these things, they're going to open these things up, but with a few exceptions, like that public lands rule that I think will just be outright repealed. Like, with a few exceptions like that, a lot of it is process-based that's going to play out over, a pretty significant period of time, and we don't know what the end product is going to look like. And because of that, it's hard to say what the impact on the ground is going to be, positive, negative, or otherwise.
Well, I really wish that before you talked about that, you would have talked on my favorite order and addressed the Gulf of America.
Sorry, you got me. Can't laugh. Makes me cough. Still getting over this illness.
Now we've talked about all the stuff we don't know what it does yet. Why didn't you start off with the stuff we do know what it does
Well,
yet?
I suppose we do know about two of them, right? So
we might as well celebrate it by having some freedom fries. And what is the other things we can have other than freedom fries?
We can celebrate the day after President's Day, I guess. We can celebrate President McKinley having a mountain named after him.
Renamed after him.
Renamed. That's what I said again.
Yeah, but I just think that if you're McKinley, you ought to be excited about that.
So those were two secretarial orders that were more immediate in their impact, I would say, in that the president directed the secretary to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, and directed the secretary to rename Mount Denali as Mount McKinley. And so there are two secretarial orders that from Secretary Burgum that do that, that were issued in response to the president's executive orders demanding that be done. So they were just following through on the orders of the president. And so those are very two tangible things that happened instantaneously, I suppose. Okay, let me pivot. Unless you had any other thoughts on that, I was going to pivot to another one of the secretarial orders.
Go ahead.
Okay. We don't need to belabor the Mount McKinley and the Gulf of America piece. We'll dive into some of the stuff that actually, is going to have it's going to take a lot of man hours, and people will see a lot more of here on the ground. There's another one I'll mention, which is Unleashing Alaska's Extraordinary Resource Potential. This is order number 3422. And again, just giving you this as an example, this is an order that implements provisions of President Trump's January 20th Executive Order 14153, which was entitled Unleashing Alaska's Extraordinary Resource Potential. Right. So this is the tear down effect of implementing the president's executive order. And this does again, just like this last one, it gives this 15-day directive to the Assistant Secretary for Lands and Minerals Management, in coordination with other secretaries, to create and submit action plans describing, okay, what are the steps necessary to execute the direction that was given in the executive order? How this, meaning, what are the steps to expedite permitting and leasing of energy and natural resource projects in Alaska, including the rights of way and easements for roads to enable for development to occur? And so again, this is all, the president issued a policy directive saying there's a ton of energy potential in Alaska, and we want to tap into that energy potential, and we want to make it feasible for people to do so, and directed the Secretary of Interior to chart the path to do so, to make it happen. And so on this one, again, it's going to start with gathering a lot of information, seeing what the current regulatory framework is, what are things that are within the purview and outside of the purview of the agency, the respective management agencies, to actually do something. Like, for example, if Congress has created a national park in Alaska, the Secretarial Order will not allow you to go into a national park and drill for oil, right? Like there are limitations that Congress has imposed on a lot of the land in Alaska that mean there's no jurisdiction for the Secretary of Interior to do anything in those places. In other places, there will be, because, for example, in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and we've talked about this before, right? The 2017 what was it called? The Jobs and Tax Act or something like that of 2017. It's what authorized and actually required the issuance of 2 lease sales in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for potential oil and gas development, right? And this administration was frustrated with the way the Biden administration handled that process, and they want to reopen that leasing process. They're going to have to go through an environmental impact statement revision, a supplemental EIS, because the Biden administration did a supplemental EIS. They're going to have to probably do their own supplemental EIS, and then they will probably go through this process and offer up more acres for potential lease in ANWR, in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. That's one of the directives in the president's executive order. It's one of the things that Congress authorized the secretary to do. And so they're going to have to do that. They're going to look at, or they don't have, I suppose they don't have to, because the prior administration held 2 lease sales, but they're going to, like, they've already made that clear. That's something they want to do, is they want to pursue that. They can't just tomorrow have a lease sale. There's a process they have to go through, and it's going to take some time. And so this secretarial order sets that process in motion. And it could take a number of years before you see anything happen there. And there are other examples like that in Alaska, where this administration is going to have policy reversals on the prior administration, and they're going to start these processes to try and facilitate development of for energy or minerals development, right, in these big parts of Alaska, these places where known resources are. So that being said, for folks that are wondering, is this going to have an impact, and what is that impact going to be? The answer is it might. And again, it's just can't tell you what that impact is yet, because we don't know where the development would be, when it would happen, and what kind of mitigation or other types of sideboards might be put on a project to try and minimize the impact, right? There's going to be a lot of process that goes along over the course of the next several years to facilitate that development. And then there'll be the conversations of, okay, what sideboards do you put on that to minimize any impact you might have on the natural environment? And there'll be, hopefully, multiple opportunities for the public to engage in those processes and provide public, comment and input and thoughts on where the right places are and where you should avoid and that kind of thing. And we'll let you know when we hear about that stuff. But again, I just don't like speculating until we've actually seen what a proposal is. I don't know if you got any follow-up on that, Nephi.
No, I don't. I think it's interesting we got asked to weigh in on these, and I would say that the challenge of that is that we don't really know yet. And a lot of them I tend to be very skeptical of the outcomes that I guess I get really jaded about people overselling the outcome when we don't know what the goals are yet or what people are going to do. And at the same time, I get skeptical of the opposite side of the coin too. People, we've done podcasts before on, say, Pebble Mine, where we've talked about, how a lot of the proposals that are going to come forward about, what people are going to do and where they're going to do it. There's a lot of them where it's just simply not going to happen. It's just a pipe dream. It doesn't make any sense economically. There are laws in place that are going to stop from happening. The amount of time that it's going to take people to move through a process of actually putting something on the ground are longer than one presidency. They're not 4-year action items. They are, decades long. That said, there is stuff that's going to happen. And I just think it's really tough and it requires a lot of discipline to stay focused on the things that are real and on where, the challenges are going to occur that, that we ought to be spending our time on because they are, the wrong ones. They're in the wrong place. They're real concerns. They're they represent threats that we should address. And that's the challenge of sifting through everything that's going on right now with this new administration, is that right now, and I think it's somewhat on purpose, it's just a big explosion. It's just, there's a whole lot of noise. And I think on purpose, we're all going to see a bunch of bright, shiny objects that are going to be meant to distract and meant to kind of, push big feelings and big actions right now, realizing that everything's going to have to get sucked back into a level of, to a smaller, manageable level of, what's really happening later on. And I think I just didn't say anything just now. I think I just, I think I just bloviated.
Yeah, I found myself doing other work.
Yeah, I
while you were on your,
bloviated everywhere.
Yeah, while you're cleaning up that mess.
Yeah.
From spouting everywhere. But I don't know, like neither one of us has maybe said all that much because there's not a ton to say at this point.
No, we've successfully spent an hour-long podcast telling everybody we don't know what's happening yet.
Yeah. I mean,
that's what we should have just started with.
Yeah, right. This could have been 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Think about this. You can have an administration come in, and this is why it's so hard, right? You can have an administration come in and say, we want to make these policy changes. We want to facilitate the ease of access to encourage development of, let's just use oil and gas as an example, because that's what the president talks about all the time with drill, baby, drill. Right? You can do that. You can open up a lot more acres for leasing, but the government doesn't tell the energy companies what to do, right? It's the energy companies decide whether they want to bid on a lease. In fact, they're usually the ones that nominate the lease in the first place, and then they bid on it, and then they're the ones that decide when it's the right time for them to actually drill, and to seek a permit to drill. There's no guarantee that even if the administration says we're going to offer up 25 million acres for lease, maybe they lease 1 million of it. I don't know. We just don't know that yet, because there's the what the government can do, and then there's also the what the private sector wants to do.
Yeah.
And does it make sense from a business standpoint for them? So there's so many unknowns at play here. Like the thing I like to tell people about the oil and gas, everybody talks about. I saw the Biden talking point, right? Of we've issued more permits to drill than the Trump administration did, and we produced more oil and gas in this country in our last year than any other country has in the history of the world. And that's true.
It's a good talking
right?
point.
That's a true talking point. But there's a lag effect on some of this, right? So, a lot of those permits to drill came out of leases that were issued well before the Biden administration was in office. There was a legal right to those leases, and then they made a determination like now is when we want to drill, and so they had this kind of flood of activity that came in. But it wasn't because of anything the Biden administration did, right? And so there's a lag effect on a lot of this, and it's when does the market dictate that it's time to do this? And then to your point, there are some places where the public pressure, like a Pebble Mine, where the public pressure is so great because it's so obviously the wrong place to do something that it's unlikely, even if you try and open it up there, that it actually happens. Maybe insurance companies, for example, won't underwrite a project in a place that the public doesn't want to see it happen. So there's so many unknowns, but the one certainty is this administration is going to be different than the last one. Like they're going to do things differently. And there is one last executive order I'd mention. All of these others, they're kind of speculative. There's one that's pretty specific, and it's achieving prosperity through deregulation. I don't know if you saw this one, Nephi, but it's
I did.
order number 3421. This one's pretty specific, and again, this is implementing. So this is Secretarial Order, but it's implementing the president's deregulation executive order. Again, all these are, trickle down to the agencies, but it is if an agency or if a bureau or office, if they want to issue a new regulation that they want to promulgate, they have to identify at least 10 existing department regulations to be eliminated.
That's bold, by the way.
10. That is really bold.
Like
10. 10.
We did this once upon a time, Dave, in
I
a
remember.
former job. And I thought it was it 3-1 that we did?
Yeah, I want to say it wasn't. I don't think it was 10.
No, it was 3-1.
Something like that.
It was
either 2 or 3-1.
So Dave and I, in
like
our brief decade almost in public service there, but that's what it was. It was like it was for us. It was a 3-1 reduction in regulations. So 10-1, and that's aggressive.
That's going to be hard to do. I think that one's going to be hard to achieve. But that's a very, very specific, very tangible. You want to write a regulation, you have to find 10 more to get rid of. That's pretty specific.
You know what would be interesting? I would bet that if we went and made everybody listen to you talk again for 10 minutes while I looked it up, I would bet that I would bet that North Dakota has a policy from the governor telling his state agencies to do a regulatory reduction. I bet Burgum did the exact same thing in North Dakota as governor. I'll bet it wasn't 10-1.
I think it was very common during our tenure that you had particularly Republican governors that were looking at how to reduce regulations, right? And so I am not going to take that bet from you because I think you're probably right about that. And I'd also guess it's not 10-1. 10-1 is really that's really ambitious. That's really that could actually be counterproductive. You may find yourself not being able to implement regulations that really need to be implemented because you can't find 10 that you can eliminate. Who knows? I don't know. It's pretty random. But anyway, that's the other executive order that I wanted to mention. So is there going to be impact? Yeah, there's going to be impact. What is that going to be? To be determined. Are we going to see proposals to change boundaries of national monuments? Maybe. Are we going to see increased acreages offered for oil and gas development? Almost certainly. Is that going to translate to increased production for oil and gas? Couldn't tell you. That's totally going to depend on markets. Are there things in Alaska, places in Alaska that are going to be opened up for development? Probably. Where are they? Not entirely sure yet. Are there going to be regulations that are going to be repealed, from different agencies? Yeah, almost certainly. All that stuff's going to happen. And I guess all I can say is over the course of the next several years, God willing, that we're still doing this podcast for the next several years, we'll provide updates on when this stuff plays out in real time, like what the proposals actually turn out to be. We'll let you know, and then we can really talk about the details of them. But until then, it's all speculation.
Well, it was a good speculatory podcast. I'm
yeah,
glad we were able
we
to.
probably didn't answer any questions from the people that wrote in about this. Everybody that wanted to know what's the impact.
So save them. Save your questions. It's nice of you to forward them. You're going to need to put them on the top of the inbox again in about 6 months. Maybe.
Why do you say that?
Because
we're
not going to.
That's when stuff happens. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to see, and we're going to there'll be individual things we'll have to then talk about. It's like, oh, well, now Interior is doing this, not Interior asked for a plan about what they could do. It's going to be interesting because this is actually a process where Burgum, when he did this, it follows some processes that I've seen before, where you basically you're reaching out and you're asking all the agency leaders, you're tasking them with innovating is exactly what he's doing. He's like, you need to innovate and tell me specifically how you're going to do these things. and you're going to build them into people's performance plans. And that's what he did with this. This is a method, and what he asked for wasn't just ideas. He told all those agencies that the way that he phrased that, it means that it's going to be stuck in everybody's performance. So they're going to get their jobs are going to be measured on whether or not they come up with ideas. So he basically let them all come up with their own ideas. And then he's like, yeah, you're going to tell me, give me some ideas of what you're going to do, and then I'm going to hold you accountable for it. That's what he did in these orders.
I think that's right. And the biggest takeaway that I can provide is, elections matter. And this is an example of how elections matter, because you run on the things you will do, like your policies. And what this is an example of the president issuing executive orders saying this is now the policy of the federal government, of the executive branch. This is now the policy of the executive branch to find out ways to facilitate energy development, transmission, all of the infrastructure, like all of the things, right? And that trickles down all the way to your local field office of the Bureau of Land Management. When then the secretary takes that order from the president and implements their own order, and then that goes to the director of the BLM, who then issues their own order. And then the state director takes that and issues its order to the state personnel. And it's all tiered back. It's all tied back to that presidential executive order saying, this is how we're doing business now. This is the priority and the policy of the executive branch of the federal government, and you're tasked with implementing that policy. And all of these secretarial orders and director's orders are focused on implementing the president's vision. That's what it boils down to. Full stop. Like, that's what this is. Under the existing authorities granted to the executive branch by Congress.
Do you think we should try and talk about this for another 45 minutes?
No. Is that what you want to do? I don't.
No. It was a challenge. I felt like we managed to do it for at least one 45-minute swath. I was wondering if we could go the extra mile for our listeners and bore them for another 45 minutes.
No, let's stop. Okay, I'll stop right now.
Okay.
We're done.
All right.
We're done. All right. Send us interesting topics. Send us ones where neither one of us nod off when the other one's talking. Hopefully this was helpful. It's more of just here's how the process works. So hopefully it helps you understand here's how all of this works. If we can answer anything else on it, send us an email, yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com. We'll do what we can. If you got another topic you want us to address, send us an email with that too. It doesn't have to be federal. We can dive down into some more local stuff. We've actually got a bunch of emails with some great ideas for some local stuff that we just need to find the right people to be able to have those conversations. But keep the ideas coming. Even if we don't use one yet, it doesn't mean we won't use it in the future. So really appreciate everybody's support and sending us thoughts and ideas for future podcasts. All right. With that, I'm going to call this a wrap.
Done.
Nephi's yawning. He's clearly bored with it too. So until next time, thanks everybody for listening. And remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.